And welcome to your library at home. My name's Sam, as I said, and I'm part of the library's public programming team. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging that we meet on country. I live and work on Gadigal land, and I'd like to take this opportunity to pay my respects to elders past, present, and especially emerging. I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal Australians who are joining us today. This evening, I welcome my colleague Ronald Briggs to our online programming. And before we kick off, I'd like to remind you that there is a Q&A function on Zoom, so please feel free to use it and ask any questions you may have, and we'll get to as many as possible at the end of Ronald's presentation. So now to Ronald. Ronald is a Gamilaroi man, originally from the central northwest of New South Wales. He trained as a school teacher, but began working as an Indigenous Services librarian at the State Library in 1991. He's a keen family historian and has also worked with the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. Tonight, Ronald will be talking to us about a fascinating period of Australia's history. In 1970, celebrations for the 200th anniversary of Cook's arrival at Kamei, now known as Botany Bay, were boycotted by Indigenous Australians. Their protest against White Australia's official reenactment ceremony was captured by a photographer from the Tribune newspaper. Ronald will be discussing these images, which provide a visual account of the important and consequential acts of defiance. I'm going to hand over to Ronald.
Thank you, Sam. I'd like to also acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, of the land on which the library, owners of the land on which the library is built. I'm glad you mentioned the Tribune, Sam, because I actually have a copy of the Tribune here from 1970, which shows the article that the Tribune produced regarding the 1970 protest against the Cook anniversary. So this is the actual newspaper article from the Tribune newspaper that talks about Aboriginal protest. As you can see, they use two photographs in the article, which is pretty usual for the way that they operated. But going through the Tribune archive, which was donated to the library by the Search Foundation in the 1980s, we discovered that there are actually many more images or photographs that were taken of that particular protest. So when we had the images digitized a couple of years ago, it was a real thrill to dive in and find these particular sets of photos that we're going to have a look at this evening. So we can get started. Okay, so I'll just like to advise any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people watching that these images do show many people who have since passed away, some quite recently. So just keep that in mind before we continue on with the presentation. It actually begins. Ooh.
Sorry, Ronald, sorry to interrupt you. Apparently there's some people having trouble with the video. Can you just double check that your video is on? And I'll leave you to it. So that on the bottom of your screen on the Zoom, the little video picture, a picture of the video, if you put your cursor all the way down. And there's a little microphone and a little video.
I can't see it, Sam. Sorry.
That's okay. We can see your slides. Keep talking. It's all good.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
It's all good. Keep talking. We can see the slides.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'll actually go back. Sorry. I'll go to the previous slide. Bear with me, everyone. This particular story actually begins earlier in the year in 1970, in February. There was a meeting that was held at the Foundation for Aboriginal Affairs in George Street, held by FCATSI, which is the Federal Council for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. They organised a meeting. It was a full agenda. There were lots of different speakers at the meeting, including people you can see here. You've got in the centre here, this is Kath Walker, Oodgeroo Noonuccal, the writer and poet poet and activist. We've got Father Frank Roberts up here. He was a leader in the Indigenous community from the north coast of New South Wales. Actually, the father of Rhoda Roberts, the arts presenter. We've got down here, you can see in the striped dress at the back, that's Faith Bandler, who was a secretary with FCAATSI, as well as many others. But what's interesting is also at that meeting in February of 1970 were Asher Joel, and he was actually the chair of the Bicentenary Citizens Committee. Now, it's interesting that he was at that meeting because he was probably there to talk about what he was planning to do on the 29th of April, the day that the rest of Australia would be celebrating Cook's arrival in Kamay, in Botany Bay. So that's Asher Joel talking to FCAATSI about what his plans were for the day. And in the other photograph, you can see a man standing up at the back there. That's a gentleman called by the name of Ken Colbung. And what's interesting about Ken Colbung is he was actually recruited by the Bicentenary Committee to organise the Indigenous participation in the reenactment ceremony that was going to happen on the 29th. So Ken Colbung is there advocating for support for his efforts in making that day a success. Sorry, I've got a copy there of a newspaper article. The next day it was reported that FCAATSI, the membership of FCAATSI were absolutely outraged that any Aboriginal person would be involved in the reenactment. And they were just the first time that I've seen Cook's landing at Kamay, Botany Bay, as being referred to as an invasion. So I thought that was a really interesting article, and the first time really that the word invasion was used to talk about Cook's arrival. A couple of months later, on the night before the 29th, when the reenactment was to happen, FCAATSI called another meeting, this time at Sydney's Lower Town Hall, and they wanted to. This meeting was particularly about how to react to the reenactment that was happening the following day, the 29th, at Kamay, Botany Bay. And this is really significant because it involves some of the real bigwigs, if you like, in the Aboriginal rights movement that was happening at the time. Again, we've got Kath Walker here. She's the first speaker. She was actually a member of FCAATSI from the Queensland branch, of course. She's wearing a sign around her neck shaped like a breastplate, and it actually says "Government property discarded." Government discarded property or something like that. The lady in the next photo is Trudy Longbottom, and that's what's interesting is that she was but she was a housewife, a resident of La Perouse, the La Perouse community, who were most affected, if you like, and most associated with Botany Bay, with Kamay. So she's a local resident associated with Kamay. We've got the leading activists from the Victorian branch of FCAATSI, Bruce McGuinness, in that particular photo. And then we've got Bert Groves, who was a leader with the Aboriginal Australian Fellowship, another organisation that operated alongside FCAATSI to advance Indigenous rights. Here we've got a very young man, a student by the name of Paul Coe, a Wiradjuri man originally from Cowra. He went on to become the first Aboriginal barrister in New South Wales, in New South Wales, sorry. We've got Sir Doug Nicholls, of course. He was very prominent. He was former Premier of South Australia, but he was there supporting FCAATSI's push to not support the Cook anniversary. John Newfong, he was living in Sydney, but he was originally from Brisbane as well. He was a journalist, in fact, the first Indigenous journalist to be employed by a major newspaper in Australia, by the Sydney Morning Herald. So he was a journalist working at the time, but also a member of FCAATSI. He actually became the leader at the beginning of leader of FCAATSI at the beginning of 1970. Here we've got Frank Roberts again. As I said, he's a pastor. He was associated with the Anglican Board of Missions, but he was giving a Christian perspective, if you like, on European arrival and settlement in Australia. And Dulcie Flower, who was actually a secretary with Fakatsi. Just to put this into a little bit of context, in 1938, there was a rather famous meeting that happened in Sydney, down in Elizabeth Street, and it happened on the 26th of February, 1938, which was the 150th anniversary, if you like, of the arrival of the first fleet. So on that particular day, many years before 1970, a group called the Aborigines Progressive Association organised a protest meeting, and they declared the 26th of February a day of mourning. So, and it's recognised as probably one of the earliest or the first major political campaign for Aboriginal rights in Australia, a truly significant event. Well, but coming back to the 1970 meeting, we've got Len Watson, who was an activist from Queensland, the Queensland Tribal Council, and we've got Faith Bandler there as a prominent member of Fakatsi. Now, Fakatsi and Faith Bandler would have been familiar to many Australians because she was a leader with Fakatsi when they were campaigning for the 1967 referendum on Aboriginal rights. So a truly remarkable woman. Now, the thing about Faith is that she's not actually Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. Her family she has South Sea Islander heritage, and her mother's actually Indian. So although she was deeply and heavily involved and a passionate supporter of Aboriginal rights, she wasn't actually an Aboriginal person herself, but she did involve herself very much with Fakatsi. So after the meeting at the Lower Town Hall, they didn't actually go home. They stayed overnight in vigil we think in Martin Place. So they camped overnight in Martin Place, and then the following morning they all met at Hyde Park near the War Memorial there. You can see they're all wearing, a lot of people are wearing badges. The badges are actually saying, "I support Aboriginal land rights." So although this was a protest against Cook and the reenactment that was happening, a lot of the supporters were heavily involved in this newly formed land rights movement. And it wasn't actually until 1972, 2 years later, that the Tent Embassy was established in Canberra, which is more closely associated with land rights. So you can see people here about to leave Hyde Park, and they make their way along Oxford Street in silent vigil. It is a day of mourning after all. You can see many of the supporters there. It looks like, and the bottom right, this is some of the Victorian contingent. And one of the great things about doing exhibitions like this is that over time, and as people become more aware of these photographs, we'll be able to get some more names of the people involved and that sort of thing. So that's a really positive thing to happen, I hope. Now, what they're doing is they're holding placards that have the names of different Aboriginal groups from across Australia. So these are of the names of Aboriginal groups from across Australia that would have been affected by colonisation at some stage. After they marched along Flinders Street, they stopped outside the Captain Cook Hotel of all places and made their way then out to La Perouse, to Frenchman's Beach at La Perouse. And these are pictures of some of the people arriving at Frenchman's Beach on that day. Now you've got to remember that on the other side of the bay at Kurnell was the official ceremony. It was attended by Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, Princess Anne, a whole host of dignitaries, including the Premier, Askin, who gave a speech. Queen Elizabeth also spoke, and I encourage you to go have a look at 8 Days in Khmer online from the library's website, because you can actually view video of those speeches as well as video of the people speaking at Sydney at Lower Town Hall the evening before, and really well worth it. So these are some scenes of the ceremony that happened at La Perouse on the day, on the 250th anniversary of Cook's arrival at Khmer, or Botany Bay. You can see you've got Pastor Roberts and Doug Nichols. They led proceedings. It was a rather sombre, solemn event. As I mentioned, it was a day of mourning. So the protesters lined the beach as members of the community took wreaths down to the bay and tossed them into the water. There was a lot of media there, print and television media, but of course most reporting at the time was focused on the other ceremony that was happening at Kurnell, the reenactment that happened, including with the involvement of Aboriginal people over there, led by Ken Colbung. So here we have some more scenes of people on the day. There's Trudy again. This is Faith, John Newfong. After the wreath throwing, they decided to make their way up to La Perouse Point, and these are people here walking from Frenchman's Beach up to La Perouse Point, because at La Perouse Point, oh sorry, I forgot to mention this, Faith Bandler wrote a poem and read it out on the day as people were taking wreaths to the water. And that was actually published in the Sydney Morning Herald the following day. So as a last act of defiance, the protesters made their way to La Perouse Point and turned their backs. It was reported they turned their backs as the Royal Yacht Britannia left Botany Bay. It was a final act of defiance, and turning their back on another boatload of British people as they left Botany Bay, Khmer. So that's the story of the 1970 protests that happened in Sydney in reaction to the 250th anniversary of Cook's arrival in Australia. And there were a wonderful set of images, all available online, but I encourage you to go online to the library's website and have a good look and scroll through the 8 Days in Khmer exhibition. This particular portion focuses on the memorial and protest part of the exhibition, but there's a lot more curated by my colleague Damien Webb that talks about Cook's landing, what was learned, what wasn't learned, what was understood, and looking at Cook from the perspective of the Gwagal people who were at Botany Bay at the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronald. And thank you. We can actually all see you now, just so you know.
Oh, good.
And thank you for that presentation. Those photos are amazing. I haven't seen those before. I did forget to mention at the top of the intro that the library's current exhibition, 8 Days in Khmer, is available online for people who want to go to the State Library website and have a look at it. It's an absolutely stunning exhibition, stunning online exhibition. So I encourage people to do that. I have got a couple of questions, if that's okay, Ronald.
Yeah, sure.
The first one is, did the official party on the other side, I'm assuming, the headland, recognise or acknowledge that the protest was going on? Do we know?
Well, not from the footage that I've seen. It was not seen or heard. They would have actually been in sight of each other. They would have been able to see each other from the other side of the bay. But no, the official ceremony that happened at Kurnell, there was no acknowledgement of the people on the other side at La Perouse.
Okay. And someone else has asked, would this have been shown on television or other news outlets apart from Tribune?
Yeah, no, well, it was, well, the footage that we have online is from the ABC. So there was an ABC segment about the protest the night before. So, yeah, and watching them, you get a real sense of just how angry people were. They were, and the report, and I've read reports, they weren't angry at Cook. They weren't angry at the Queen. They were just angry at the effects that colonisation had that had been led, or spearheaded, if you like, by Cook and his arrival in 1770.
So interesting. And did this become a kind of regular gathering, or was it just kind of on very kind of auspicious or monumental kind of markers, or did it?
Yeah, no. Well, at the time, in 1970, the anniversary of Cook's arrival was the biggest thing. All of the newspapers, all of the television, all of the radio for a year in advance, much like, you know, in the lead up to the Olympics that we had in 2000. It was all anyone could talk about. There were you know, special sporting events and art exhibitions, you name it, anything that could commemorate Cook in 1970, people were doing it, not just in Sydney but across Australia. It was massive.
Right. Finally, I'm going to call on your tech prowess. Someone has asked if you could go back to the slide with the poem on it.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because some couple of people have said they'd just like to have a quick look at that. So,
oh, okay.
Let you do. There it is.
I know. I couldn't get it any bigger without taking it off the screen. Oh,
there you go.
But yeah, if you have X, oh no. Yes, it is on, but it is on the Kamei 8 Days in Kamei online story in much clearer detail. If you want to have a read of it there. And some of these, it's a bit of a lament. It's
yeah. Some of these photos are in the exhibition as well.
That's right. Yeah. Like I said at the beginning, there are only 2 photos that are actually published in the Tribune of the, you know, at the time, but altogether there are more than 50 images that, you know, show the progress of the night before, the march down Oxford Street, and then the protest as it happened at La Perouse.
Thank you so much, Ronald. That was really, really interesting, and I hope we've left that poem up long enough. It's a great piece of writing. That's all from us tonight, Ronald. Even thanks to everyone for bearing with us with our tech problems at the beginning. I think we managed to pull that off, Ronald. We did all right.
Yeah, so we got through,
yeah. Thank you, Ronald, and thank everybody. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you very soon at our next talk. Tomorrow we've got a talk coming up. Just go to www.sl.nsw.gov.au for all of our public programs and also for the exhibition 8 Days in Kamei. And with that, I'll wish you all a very good night. Thank you.
Thank you.